Welcome to the ACT branch of the AIIA. My name is Heath McMichael and I'm branch president. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present. Now, all too clearly, it seems these days, we're confronted in the media with harrowing reports about the persecution of women and girls in a variety of Islamic countries. Tonight, we will look at how women are trying to achieve economic empowerment in the Muslim world, with a particular focus on the most popular Muslim nation, Indonesia. Our speaker will explore gender inequality in patriarchal Muslim societies and ask how changing modes of economic transaction work to the advantage of the livelihoods of women entrepreneurs in these and indeed other societies. So to lead the conversation, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the Deputy Head of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences of the University of New South Wales in Canberra, Associate Professor Minako Sakai. Minako has a wealth of research experience in gender, Islamic and international development studies with a focus on Indonesia and the Indo-Pacific. The presentation tonight draws on a recently co-authored book with Professor Amelia Fauzia from the State Islamic University in Jakarta, entitled Women Entrepreneurs and Business Empowerment in Muslim Countries. And I see Minako brought a copy of the book here. Now, Minako has a PhD in anthropology from the ANU. She's completed research fellowships at the ANU, Cornell University, and the National University of Singapore. Amongst other publications, Narratives of Muslim Movement and Women's Agency and the Politics of the Periphery in Indonesia. At UNSW, she teaches in Indonesian studies and supervises research students in Southeast Asian social inquiry. Now, the format tonight, Minako will speak for 20 minutes or so, and then I'll call for questions from our in-house audience, that's you folk here, as well as those from online, who should submit questions in a normal manner through the Q&A function on your Zoom set there. So we're going to finish by 7 p.m. Minako, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Heath. That's really wonderful. Thank you very much. So I just moved to the rec down. So. Yeah, good evening, and thank you very much for really coming this evening to share my research, which I have conducted and completed in a book. And it actually took, writing itself is probably 5 years, but I'm thinking wise, I think it would have taken much longer. So I think I'm really pleased to receive an invitation from his to share. But I think my challenge was really condense what I wrote, together with Amelia in half an hour. So I think this challenge for academic is we can actually really hog up all the space. But I like to really share what I think we like to really think together, particularly for the policy and future kind of planning. So next, please, Josie. So as he said initially, I think he wanted me to talk about disaster relief in Asia Pacific, and perhaps next time when I have an opportunity, I really would like to also share some of the research. Particularly, I work on community resilience, and how everything fits together is I'm interested in sort of equitable, fair development policies in Indo-Pacific region, particularly with a focus on Indonesia. So I've known his for really since I was a PhD student for a long time. So about 30 years ago, I think. So I've been working on how actually equitable and fair development can be achieved. And gender issue, particularly women, are among one of the kind of areas where I work on, but I also work on rural development, as well as poverty reduction. And I see disaster relief as sort of long-term development, community empowerment. So all of kind of issues are put together. And today I like to just focus on a newly published book. I only have it just this one copy, or few copies I received from the publisher just last week. So just in time for this talk, and yeah, I'm really pleased to see the actual result. So what I'd like to talk about is how we approached and what it means, sort of really big topic, and then where this particular work fits. And I also brought two of my PhD students, and some of perhaps, people who are thinking about doing PhD, or people who are also working on policy areas. I'd just like to explain where this fits. And I like to talk about also case studies of Muslim countries, and the conclusion as a conclusion, I like to elaborate on policy implications of what actually we found and what we can do together. So that's what I like to do. So particularly this women's economic empowerment issue is important. And on the right side, you can see sustainable development goals. Number 5 is gender equality. And what it means by gender is basically men and women's relationships socially constructed. So it is not just a women's issue, it is actually societal, big issue. And it is very important, and it became even more important because this policy belief from impact of COVID-19 on women by United Nations, really, this is kind of snipping from the report. And all you can see is actually impact of this COVID really put forward a lot of good results on gender empowerment. So women really are badly affected, and particularly younger women are more likely than men, to live in extreme poverty. So in this context, what I like to really emphasize is this women's economic empowerment is not just a sort of a logo, one of the policies, but it really is a real issue. So the poverty, how poverty affects women, and what we can actually offer. It's something we really need to think together. So just a little bit of sort of background of where sort of my work with Amelia, this particular book fits. And I'd like to just sort of enlighten theoretical and international commitments on this issue. So really, this is a post-colonial kind of issues, and often it's women in development. And then next sort of policy launched was gender and development, often abbreviated as GAD, GAD. And currently, I think prior to that, Millennial Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals, and currently sort of the gender equality. So that's sort of very broad view of the international sort of framework or the policies we talk about it in. And I just like to just unpack a little bit what it means and what is the problem. So academic research definitely always explore what is missing and what we can do better. So in that discussion, so this initially women in development, it's really immediately after sort of independence of newly, post-colonial countries like Indonesia. And this women in development approach, I think, good intentions. And usually, I think when we have new initiatives, good intentions, but not necessarily always good. And that's really, critical of how we see. And we like to really make it better. So this, if we look back, what was actually missing was women are sort of usually sort of do this, do that, worked on, sort of, they didn't really have the scope to express their agency. And they should be part of productive economy to earn income. But I think what's really important is this women's multiple roles, as usually a wife and mother and a worker, sort of, or, professional, whatever, sort of the work we do, 3 things in one, and this elasticity of women's time and labor has not been fully considered. So I think one of the discussions last night before we went to bed, last night at home, I have a son who is a uni student and also husband. So I won't be back until, perhaps 7:30. I live in the north side. So that was really kind of, okay, so someone has to put the, dinner on the table, and definitely until now, this is really women in development in 70s, but I can say this particular topic, of me as a professional woman, senior academic in a university, but still we have to deal with it. So this is really an issue, like in order to be here, I need to kind of look after the other part of my life, which is quite substantial, to make sure that they can raid the fridge. So that's what I did, and this is really the issue. And so I think next then, okay, this GAD, how it went is really it became popular in the 80s, late 80s and 90s onwards. And this really is really aware of the failures targeting women, only sort of project implementations, and women do not have any agency in the decision-making issue. So I think the very important concept is empowerment. So they really need to have the will to change, and they need to be given some tools. So that's how this really is a kind of progress, but still criticisms. So what are they? And the important thing is, I think women, particularly why women's value, women's economic empowerment, what's important? It's actually very monetary, how much they can earn, and also they have to be engaged in this neoliberal kind of economic productive agent. So, and another one is, well, I totally agree, and I'm not really denying this particular view of women's position in society. But when we talk about feminism, so it's my life, so let me do what I want to do. If that's not necessarily the particularly sellable slogans or message in very strong patriarchal societies, and this is where I think currently I can see, problems really exist. So my task with Amelia was how then we can really achieve gender equality, but how then we can really find a society where that particular value is supported. So, for example, particularly women working and leaving home, and what kind of ideas or what kind of strategies locally can actually push this idea. So what Amelia and I really have been working on Indonesia for a long time, and we have tried to identify what Indonesian Muslim women are doing well in this area. And what we have found out is a role modeling. So in surely Western societies, well, fashion models to political icons, we can find someone to look up to. And that's really an important message to sell. And particularly if these particular role models are embedded in very important values, particularly in Muslim societies, to women really focused as very important figures. So they are wives of the Prophet Muhammad. And Khadija, the first wife, she was older than him, about, I think, 15, 16 years. And she was a widow before she married him. And she was a very successful entrepreneur. And this aspect is very much sort of not really coming up. But in Indonesia, right now, I think for the last about 10, 15 years, I have seen a lot of sort of references to Khadija, that women are going to become like Khadija. That means, she is really devoted wife. She produced 3 kids, and she ran really a successful business. And that money has been also used to for her husband to preach. So for her husband, to lead the Muslim community. So her contribution is really important. And Aisha, who is another younger wife, and she's known to be very pious and very intelligent, who remembered what sort of late period of Prophet Muhammad did. So she is known as so-called transmitter of hadith, deeds and sayings of the Prophet, and she's also known as very wise and intelligent women. And so what Indonesian women are doing is in Indonesia, as you can see, perhaps people, if you went to Indonesia in the 60s, 70s, then not many people wearing, scarf at all. So the fact that everyone now, if you go to Indonesia, Jakarta, in a middle class shopping malls, everyone's really wearing a scarf is actually a modern phenomenon. So the fact that everyone becomes really educated professional and they will therefore become very secular is a very much a sort of misconcept. So in fact, in Islamic economy, where halal food is really consumed and produced, and that really is important, and giving opportunities for particularly women to participate, and they can actually start up cooking and culinary and sort of catering businesses. And I think just before maybe, I can also say that in Indonesia, what's important is Islamic kind of interpretations of womanhood is not necessarily controlled by the state or particular organizations. So a lot of people use social media, perhaps, you do Instagram and Twitter and also Facebook and other kind of WhatsApp groups. So this sort of medium is used to discuss what is really appropriate to do as a woman. Is it okay to leave husband and kids and then work? But then if it is really for the sake of to become Khadija, to become Aisha, that really discourse is very much supported, because that really gives credit to the husband, that, well, husband should become best human being as possible. That is actually Muhammad, the Prophet himself. So this particular dialogue really way of selling is very much Goa in Indonesia, and that's definitely helping. So next, please. So from here onwards, I just like to give a lot of some information about comparison of where Indonesia is located against other case study countries such as Bangladesh or Malaysia or Saudi Arabia. So I've got more statistics and data in the book, so I'm just giving only a gist of it, and I like to encourage people to look at the actual data as well. But as you can see, Indonesia is very much ahead of other countries, Muslim dominant countries. And what I think we really like to look into is how Indonesian government and Indonesian society really provided very conducive environment. So Saudi Arabia, for example, has got, well, I looked at it, and oil economy hampered women's participation in work. So women really were not asked to work because oil economy, thriving oil economy, really attracted migrant workers from, for example, South Asia. And women's also sort of, after getting high education, women decided not to get married. So that's another issue. And also Saudi is now promoting women's professional work and entrepreneurship as part of Saudi 2030. But well, it's still to be seen. And at the moment, I think this particularly important is in Saudi Arabia, interpretations of Islam really are in the hands of the king, and the state. Therefore, I think it is very difficult to kind of really be creative like Indonesia. And currently, I think what particularly the Prince is promoting is professional single women successfully undertaking entrepreneurship. And South Asia, particularly Bangladesh, I have looked at some cases, and well, definitely the state has given access to education for girls that really progress well, scholarships provided, but and then women participated in the public service. That is actually progressed, But in other areas like sort of markets in Indonesia, a lot of places you can really see women working in the market, but in South Asia you hardly see them as. So it's because of the particular sort of custom of seclusion, purdah, and that is still seen as sort of putting women in public is seen as a shame for the family. So that kind of custom still seems to be a problem. And I think another important issue is patrilocal marriage discourages women from work outside family in need of care. So women really are sort of providing much needed care, domestic chores, and I think that's considered to be the only kind of task given to the women. Therefore, women really find it difficult to really argue that they like to really sort of look for opportunities to earn income. So I think the examples I have located in Bangladesh, for example, are very much Western educated women. And so they are educated, you know, and they really work in IT and particularly well-regarded business areas. So then I think Indonesia, what we have seen, and I have focused on particularly Muslim women who are trying to be a mother, trying to be a wife, and also they are also making use of thriving halal, you know, Islamic products. And I have focused on, for example, Wardah. It's a halal cosmetic company. And I have also met Ibu Nurhayati Sebakat a couple of times. And she's really promoting. So women can be beautiful, women can be inspiring, and women can be, you know, halal and Sharia compliant. So that's the kind of image she's setting, and she also, you know, accommodates people who are not even wearing a jilbab, you know, as well. So this is kind of mirror of sort of appropriate as a Muslim woman, and also kind of new model where you can say that she herself established this particular cosmetic company, which has become the largest halal cosmetic company in Indonesia. And price-wise, it's really appealing to public servants. It's not that expensive, like, for example, Western, you know, brands like, I'm not quite sure, gentlemen are familiar with Chanel or other, you know, brands, Christian Dior, but it's halal and it's kind of affordable and it's good quality, and then it's a good skincare, and it's really picking up. So, and then what she's saying is also she often appears, she uses two of her daughters, I think, and her family business, and she's trying to really encourage so-called mompreneurs, mother, to be a wife, and then to be an entrepreneur. And then she's also educated in higher education as a chemist initially, a pharmacist. So what we are seeing here is really why she could become, you know, from no one to really top CEO, and, you know, has grown her business from zero to really the spectacular level. Is, I think, she's really going to attract and support from the society where she can be an entrepreneur, she can be a good mother, and then she can also become a really good Muslim woman. And she is known as philanthropic activities. So, and she's also promoting a lot through social media, as well as well, Facebook and the internet. And then she also appears in women's Islamic study groups, where she really promotes the interpretation that becoming a Hadija, you know, becoming a good, pious Muslim woman, and trying to be the best woman as possible, and trying to be a entrepreneur, so that you don't have to be in the office from 9 to 5. You know, that message really is attracting a lot of professional women in Indonesia who really had enough of sort of dividing time between family and work. So the way she started her business is also because she really couldn't look after her children when her children were sick. So this really made her think what she could do if she's not really working in the office. And she also got inspired by her friends who are asking for, is there anything, Muslim women can use to be halal or Sharia compliant and to become really beautiful. So this notion particularly appeals to women, middle-class women who like to look great. I think all the women, I'm pretty sure they like to look great, under the even burqa. I'm sure I think they are all dressed up, usually. So this really appeals to middle-class educated women, and she's really has grown her business as a family business, and also trying to encourage people to start up as well. So, but I think what I can say is in Indonesia, this is not really the only good thing. Digital divide, people who cannot really use mobile phones, smartphones, they are left out. So we need to remember that digital economy is not necessary or pro and all, right. So last one is the Malaysian example. And I have focused on particular, I have looked at policies as well as other environment. And compared to Malaysia, I think Indonesia did well by organizing women's organizations where, for example, Dharma Wanita, or you probably have heard, or the women's organizations. And they have been provided opportunities to learn how to decorate house or how to make really nice snacks, and nutritious. All of these kind of trainings provided in Indonesia, particularly to the wives of the public servants, really helped for Indonesian women to become entrepreneurs. Whereas in Malaysia, I think it's much more sort of opportunities for training was much more limited, in a sense that being an ethnic Malay had much less sort of connections with trade. And also in Malaysia, the state really controlled the interpretations of Islam. So kind of promoting particular idea of Khadijah, Aisha, that sort of interpretations of Islam, communication was much more limited. But I think what we are seeing is a kind of similar trend like Indonesia, where educated middle-class women using social media, growing their entrepreneurial kind of activities. So Bibi Yusuf herself has a bachelor's degree from London School of Economics. And she speaks English, and the way she started her business is she had already built her kind of supporters through blogs. So initially, when she was a student, she already started blogging, and she already had a lot of sort of mobilized fans. And what she is doing now is, you can really see the titles. She has, I think, 4 children, and then she's basically sharing all her personal family details, and also trying to develop some of the kind of domestic daily goods or modest fashion to go with the occasion. So a lot of young Malaysian middle-class people can relate to her life. And then she has really grown her business as a modest fashion icon in Malaysia. So just last month, she was really featured in the major kind of fashion entrepreneurs in the world, together with Armani or something. So what we are seeing here is women trying to be a mother, trying to be a wife, and trying to be very Islamic. And then they are really making progress for gender equality, economic empowerment. So next, please. So I'm just summarizing last few slides on what then works. So we started off with gender empowerment, particularly women's economic empowerment. And I think I criticized about sort of Western lens for gender equality. So if someone in the book, I have also featured single professional women, whether they are happy or not happy. Perhaps I think I'd like to take a vote. Would you think single women not married as a Muslim women, are they feeling happy or not happy?
Well, happier than I used to be.
Or unhappy, or
It depends on the particular location, whether in urban society or rural society, whether they are happy.
in general, I think it is kind of sin not to well, it is very difficult acceptance in according to Islam. So a lot of women are married, professionally successful professors. They even in the interviews I had, they're kind of sobbing that God is
Depends
not
what you mean by happy.
happy. Yeah, but they really felt like they are not fulfilling their obligation as a good Muslim woman. And that is very important. And so if we are sort of setting the message that gender equality, sustainable development goals, and also, COVID impact, and it is your right. I think surely what we like to achieve is important, but I think it is not really getting buying in from Muslim women nor Muslim men. So the way I analyze sort of how Indonesia is doing well is a lot of Muslim women who are successful are married with kids, and then they are particularly undertaking Muslim obligations such as almsgiving, charity, and community development. And they also have a kind of identity to be a Muslim woman. And eventually that gives really credit to husband that, oh, your wife is so good, husband must be even better. And that particular lip service seems to be very important in order for Muslim women to be accepted in society. So in reality, this supported is, well, it's a bit like, okay, read the fridge, I said in the morning, and I think my family members said fine this morning. So it is just a sort of saying just fine, but that itself is considered to be a support enough, for the community. And that really gives sort of status for the husband to feel secure. So when we challenge this particular notion of patriarchy, I think it is really important to really highlight how their husbands are kind of seen in the society. Next, please. And so I think that's just content of the book, but I have really covered a lot of issues from this. And that's really the last slide here is then policy implications. So there are quite a lot of initiatives now to really assist women. So I was just looking at DFAT side, which actually took me to this Making Finance Work for Women Summit. And the other one is UN Women's side, which is working together with EU and other organizations about what to provide in order to really achieve gender equality and women's economic empowerment. And it's true, I think its financing is important. It's true to give really childcare important. But at the same time, I think what I really am really arguing for is local kind of concept, which really support these ideas. So just bringing sustainable development goals or gender equality as human rights itself, I think that's really fundamentally important, but it really needs to be fashioned in a particular local knowledge so that the local society can feel that that is actually a good thing within their kind of perception. So that's how I see I like to see, and I like to be engaged in sort of policymakers in this way, what kind of key local concepts and ideas can be aligned with really, women's economic empowerment. So on that, I think that's my contact details, and I just like to, finish here. But we like to just invite people to come to some of the events we are running at school, which is AUKUS conference, which is on next Monday at National Press Club, and a lot of high-profile politicians attending. And next Thursday, we are also launching 30 over books written by our visiting fellows, emeritus professors, such as James Cotton and Aurelia George, perhaps people who you are familiar with. And so my book is one of them. So that's probably where I stop.
All right,
Thank you very much.
Yeah. We've got about 25 minutes for questions, and while people are fashioning yours, I might start the ball rolling. When I go, going through my mind, women's economic empowerment, to what degree is that a reflection of women in leadership roles? If we look at Indonesia vis-a-vis the Philippines, in the Philippines, women have had a history, or part of the culture of that country is women in national leadership roles, not only in politics, but in business as well. And that makes their position much higher and much more secure in a way. But if you look at Indonesia, how is it the role of women in the political sphere there? Do you see that changing? Does it matter? Is there more role for women in the mass social organizations, the NU organization and Muhammadiyah and so on?
I think whether NU or Muhammadiyah or these Islamic organizations will have female leaders, I really don't think so, because I think this particular Islamic interpretations that men should be the leaders, right? So, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are not sort of seeing women's position as not particularly important, or in fact, I was asked to endorse a book written by wives of public servants, Dharma Wanita, and they are all wives of high profile academics, particularly vice chancellor at the rector's level. And the content itself was quite sort of really talking about how I can balance, professional career as an academic, also professor in a university, and a wife, and they are actually publishing these books. So, and then they asked me to endorse these books. So what I am seeing is, I think their view is they do not necessarily want to have them in the position as the leader, but they really see women's position in society very important. And therefore, I think they will give women particular space to lead and contribute. So I like to see whether it is a token figure or it is actually a substantial change we may see through particular,
You're talking already about the figure of Khadija from the past,
yes,
from Muslim history. But if you look at Indonesia's National Day for Women,
yes,
Kartini Day,
yes,
which refers to a young Javanese woman of high birth who wrote during the 19th century about the role of women in Javanese, Indonesian, Proto-Indonesian society at that time. But is there any likelihood, from what you're saying, that we might have a Kartija Day at some stage in the future? In that country, Indonesia.
Yes and no, because Indonesia has this, Pancasila, which is basically where all the religions need to be respected. So making Khadija Day is perhaps what Muslims would like to see. And in fact, I think there's a movement to really change Kartini's clothing. Kartini's clothing, her portrait never had a veil. But these days, there are some cartoons appearing with her wearing a veil. But I think that is considered to be kind of undermining nationalism of Indonesia, where inclusiveness is very important. So I think I focus on Muslim women. It's because I think it really accounts for quite a lot of population in Indonesia. But I do not necessarily see that Kartini will be replaced by Khadija.
No.
Yeah.
Fair enough. All right, questions? Yes, at the back there.
My ignorance, but what percentage of the Indonesian population would be profoundly Muslim. And you say all the religions must be respected.
Yes.
So what are the percentages? So are there women from other cultures or other religious groups in Indonesia which are standing up and being moral that might help Muslim women?
I think foundation of Indonesia is definitely inclusive of 5-6 religions, you know, and Islam accounts for about 85 to, you know, yeah, more than 85% of the population, and particularly in Java, you know, which is really most populous kind of country. So I think what's happening is, but I think the success of, for example, on I think Kautini Day, you know, Minister of, you know, sort of Women Affairs and Children, she, I think she is not, she's from Bali, I think. I think she also, yeah. So, I think in that way, what I am seeing is, any success as a woman transcends sort of this kind of religious boundaries. And I think Indonesian government always, I think whenever I dealt with Indonesian government, they always wanted to put it in a more kind of neutral context where it's women's empowerment, not Muslim women's empowerment. And that's really, I think, really, I think credit goes to Indonesian government to try to accommodate, you know, so everyone, irrespective of the religion. And I really do not see sort of Islam to be embedded everywhere in our society, but not officially the only religion. I don't particularly see as a policy. Yeah.
All right. Ernst, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you for your talk. You mentioned fairly early in the talk that women faced the question of juggling their role as wife, mother, and worker. Yes. One could say the same about men. Men also have a role of husband, father, and worker. In Australia, over recent years, there has been a change in relation to domestic responsibilities. More and more men are sharing in domestic responsibilities. My question to you is whether in Indonesia, where women achieve positions of prominence in business or social or public life, there is a change in the sharing of domestic responsibilities, whether their husbands now contribute to the domestic responsibilities in the way that has happened in Australia.
Yes, it's true that what I think is important is I think gender roles determined by particular interpretations of Islam, and in general, I think domestic chores are really assigned to women's work, but it doesn't mean that women have to cook, so long as now I think these Uber Eats and all the applications really made it easier, so women can arrange. And I think in middle class level, particularly, a lot of women are working. And as I mentioned to Keith, that women's Public Servants Wives Association, for example, they a lot of professionals' wives are wives are also professionals, and therefore I think, you know, your question, you know, of definitely they are dividing the task, but I think what is important is it also depends on some of the regions of Indonesia. So in Java, a lot of men tend to do more domestic chores than I think Sumatran areas, you know, closer to Malaysia and Singapore, and that's also coming from the local cultural influence. And so how are they are they kind of negotiating? In reality, yes, a lot of middle class educated couples are dividing the task. But whether that is broadcast through social media, hey, my husband is washing up, I don't think that's considered to be kind of appropriate image of manhood. And I think that's really the subtle kind of, it is, I do not necessarily see that as becoming a very kind of trendy yet. So in fact, so my answer is, in reality, tasks are shared, particularly among highly educated professionals. But how much they open up, yeah, in a sense, I was actually surprised when I was endorsing the book, written by wives of the public servants, because it really uncovered what these kind of big professors, male professors are actually doing at home. And so things are slowly changing, but in reality, particularly at the sort of lower middle class level, I think it is still not to be particularly proud to be doing all of this yet. I think just yet.
All right, Desmond.
Thanks for a very interesting talk. My question relates to education. Some years ago, Australian money was given to assist with basic literacy and education. And it was discovered after some time that some of that money was going to boys-only madrasas, where all that was really being taught was to recite the Quran in Arabic, which doesn't help anybody with anything much in the modern world, particularly if it's not even in your own language, you're not learning literacy. And so there were two objections. One was to the idea that it was going for that, and also, of course, that it was gender discriminatory. It was boys only. So my question is about how easy is it for a girl to finish high school in a co-educational environment and to go on into tertiary studies compared with boys? I'm aware that madrasas are not the only education system in Indonesia, but nevertheless, a substantial number of boys come to the end of their schooling, having learned very little that'll be of much use in the modern world. And of course, very many girls, as I understand it, don't get the opportunity to finish secondary schooling. Could you comment on that?
Yes, I actually thought about it, and then chapter, I think it was 4 of this book, we have a section where particularly professional educated education, how education really affects this, gender relations. So your questions really are touching really important aspects of what actually changes this, gender relations. But what is very interesting in Indonesia is, in general, there's not much difference between men and women in completing sort of basic education up to I think it was year 9. So that is compulsory. So, and in fact, the retention rate of girls in school is higher, because I think the expectation for men to be the household head financially responsible means men always have to leave school to be able to generate an income. So dropout rates for boys tend to be actually higher. And in financing and law, particular kind of sections of the university is absolutely dominated by female students and in Indonesia. So it's true that Islamic education is sort of gender segregated, but it's not the preferred mode of education in Indonesia either. So a lot of famous Indonesian politicians and Muslim scholars, they tend to send their children to best public education. Yeah. Yes. So I think here what is coming out here is some sections are definitely, as you have observed, are very much sort of conservative, and they really think, reciting the Quran, the God words is most important. That is still true, but at the same time, some modern Islamic boarding schools actually teach particularly to boys IT. And I have also studied and published on Islamic microfinancing. And one of the largest Islamic microfinancing institutions was run by and has been successfully run by Islamic boarding school, where they thought that's really the winning ticket for this particular boarding school to survive and generate an income to educate. I think Indonesia is very sort of diverse and large, and but in general, I think bulk of the prestige and quality education goes to public sector, and it's secular and it's co-ed. Yeah.
Just encourage members online to, participants online to contribute any questions that they have via Q&A or the chat
Also, I
function.
think the gentleman.
But before we turn to, I might just ask one question before we turn to our next question.
Yes.
And that is, when we're looking at, I had a look at the Asia Foundation website the other day,
Yes.
and the programs that they have in the women's space, if you like. And they're geared to increasing skills for women entrepreneurs, taking advantage of the gig economy development in many developing societies, not just Indonesia, of course, right throughout the world, and the developing world in particular. So my question, just asking for a comment on how that emphasis on digital economy and women participating in the economy is facilitated by digital transactions.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really a great question. And yeah, I thought about it and also published one article on this, and which is who can participate in this digital economy and how that will actually assist women, whether does it really assist women. So what I really looked at is a lot of people who can migrate from this office-based sort of 9 to 5 to this digital economy is highly educated people who really can understand applications or smartphones, and they actually prefer working that way because that gives flexibility and they work at home. But at the same time, I think what I wrote together with my former student is this gig economy is making women's employment sort of invisible. So if they are working in a public sector, particularly government, they can eventually get pension, they can get some social security. Whereas if they participate in gig economy, then they are on their own and they are not counted as sort of worker, and they do not necessarily meet and go through all the legalities for their work. So I think it is, I have also looked at this particular process of training of small businesses. So a lot of women who start up eventually have to be trained and counseled to make their business much more formal. And that process is most important so that women can be counted as actually visible workers. Because if the government or international organizations do not have statistics that women are not working, then I think in fact that they are working, but they're working at home and not paying taxes, and they are not also protected, you know.
Risky.
Yeah, so I think what's important is right now, I think, but if we make everything right, then people may not have anything to eat. So I think this particular impact of COVID is they have to work and they have to eat. But at the same time, when they start really startups, eventually I think the training to formalize their work as an entrepreneur, as a business, that's really, I think, important for the you know, organizations or government to assist. And that process is, I think, next stage where I really like to see, you know.
You know, it's work for not just governments, but international agencies of one sort or another.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, because I think quite a lot of emphasis has been given to training. And anyone who can start up is great, and which is true, because anyone has to, we have to start from somewhere, I think. So next stage is really when they have come to a particular stage, then the legalities, legalizing and making their work registered, paying tax, or that stage requires a lot of training and resources. And that's probably where I think one-stop shop of kind of assistance, where I think the government or international organizations or NGOs can perhaps, step in, and that's really needed, I think.
All right, now we've got a question over here, I think. But just identify yourself if you don't mind.
Jackson from the ANU. You briefly compared Saudi Arabia to Indonesia. And one of the things that you noted was the absence of the state in Indonesia as opposed to Saudi Arabia in providing interpretations of the Quran. I was just curious as to what extent would you attribute Indonesia's progressive policies and relative gender equity down to the absence of the state as opposed to, say, local culture or regionality
Yeah,
in comparison to Saudi Arabia?
Yes, that's really, I think, important aspect, and that's what I really spent a lot of time in analyzing. And Indonesia does not well, surely there is a Ministry of Religious Affairs, and they can decide which particular day is the Eid al-Fitr, or but for example, what kind of headscarf has to be worn. So they do not really necessarily go into the details of that. And that is really left to Islamic authorities. And that could be so-called Nahdlatul Ulama or Muhammadiyah or kind of mass organizations. Or in fact, I think one article which I also published with Amelia is to look at Islamic orientations, and people are really trying to explore through social media and their own search. So it could be Islamic preachers or female preachers, very trendy through Instagram. And that sort of interactions are allowed in Indonesia, whereas in Malaysia, as well as Saudi Arabia, I think if it becomes too much, then I think we know there come some sort of unwanted consequences. Particularly, a lot of female activists got sort of became missing in Saudi Arabia as well. Particularly people who demanded. Eventually, I think women now can drive, but before that, a lot of activists who really demanded that to be disappeared from social media as well. So that sort of interaction with intimidation, fear, definitely contributes to kind of this kind of gender empowerment. Whereas in Indonesia, I think for the last 20 years or so, I think it's been very, very dynamic. In a sense, we are seeing radical aspects of it, but at the same time, very innovative, interpretations, which really are helping. But I think what's really still holding back is, as Desmond said, I think priority for jobs or priority for training tend to go to men. And it's because the expectations that men should be the household heads, and therefore they should be the first to grab the opportunity. And I'm sort of talking to one of the leading Islamic organizations to kind of learn about this gender equality and how they can accommodate more gender inclusive policies and programs so that women can be assisted and given priorities. So I think it's really important to look at interpretations of Islam and what is deemed to be appropriate in society, and what actually values really shape that.
All right, well, there are one last question from, yes, all right. Yeah.
I don't think that my voice is so loud.
But you need to identify yourself, thank you.
So like in Bangladesh case, like in social media and other areas, when people are asked about the women empowerment or women employment, their views that give one job to a man so that the one family is created or empowered. rather than giving a job to a woman. Because if you give a job to man, that means the family is empowered, not an individual. So it's better to give a job to man when we have both men and women.
Mm.
That is the local interpretation of the culture.
Mm. Well, thank you for that contribution, and it really underlines the very diverse state of patriarchy in the Muslim world and responses to it, I suppose, which Minako has very craftily, very thoroughly taken us through some of the main issues, including the theory behind women in development and other models for women's participation, economic and otherwise. So on behalf of the Institute, I'd like to thank Minako for contributing her thoughts tonight, and if we could show Thank you. Before everyone goes, let me say that our next meeting is in fact the annual general meeting of the ACT branch of the AIIA, and that takes place on Wednesday, the 23rd of November in this venue. So all members are welcome to come. It will be a short annual general meeting. And then afterwards, we will have a presentation by one of our long-standing members, Ian Dudgeon, who will talk about the situation in Iran at the moment. So I think even if you're not a fan of AGMs, you can come along and take part in our presentation. First the AGM if you like, please, and then the presentation afterwards. So look forward to seeing as many of you as we can that night. Thank you.
Thank you.